Hey y'all, I'm Heather,
And I'm Terry.
and this is the More Than Able podcast.
And on this week's episode, we are going to discuss the importance of intimacy.
So, the importance of intimacy. What is that? Intimacy. Ooh.
Yeah, how do
Ba-chicka
you-
wow wow. That's what it is, right?
Yes and no. Not no, but yes. But it's also other things.
I think some people might get excited when they see the importance of intimacy because they're going to be like, oh, yes.
Oh, it's
intimacy.
that kind of episode. Well, we'll hit on some of those things. But intimacy is not just physical. It's not just sex. It is much deeper than that.
Yeah. It really goes more into the emotional side of things, which I think maybe for women, maybe we connect with that a little bit more. I think
Absolutely.
it's probably a little bit harder for men to get into that emotional side of things.
Yeah, women are definitely more on the connection side of the emotional and the words, and men are more physical.
Yeah. I would tend to lean towards thinking that women see the emotional and physical side as one, that like you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
Whereas men can, kind of compartmentalize and have
Absolutely.
one or the other.
Yeah, but they're both important, and they're both so important that you should have them together.
Yeah.
But so like intimacy can be defined as to be fully known and fully know, but also without the fear of rejection.
Yeah.
So to be fully known and fully know without the fear of rejection.
Yeah. So that looks like I'm going to fully know you and I'm going to be fully known by you without that fear, of rejection,
Yeah.
which can be really, really hard.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. It can be easy on the good aspect, but it can be extremely difficult when we failed somehow or somewhere. And I think that's why we talk about that fear, is because there's been times where I've had to tell you, where I've failed, and shame wants to creep in, negative thoughts want to creep in, and it's those thoughts of, well, if I tell her this, she's not going to love me, or not love me as well.
Yeah. Being fully known, it just takes you to that place of vulnerability that a lot of people just aren't comfortable with. I think especially too at the beginning of a relationship, when you might be coming in with baggage, we talked about that on a previous episode, and to fully let someone into that space of your life can be really difficult. Because like you said, there may be shame tied to that. There may be regret tied to that. Maybe there's something in your past that you did that you don't really want to share with anybody else. But when you're entering into a marriage type relationship and you want to create that true emotional intimacy, you have to be willing to open up those places of your life that you wouldn't open up with just anybody.
Yeah. Well, and obviously you said that, it's being vulnerable. But a lot of times we like to pretend like we have it all together. And again, I think that is a response of fear. But what if it looks like the response from our spouse is not exactly what we hoped for? Or it is our fear. If I was to come to you and share where I failed, and I have this fear of how you're going to react, and that's exactly how you react. And then it puts me in a place where it's like, well, crap. I was trying to be vulnerable, and I was trying to share with her, and I was trying to be intimate, and all of my fears come true. Like, you weren't understanding, you weren't forgiving. I'm not saying you have been this way. I'm just saying, like, those can be the things that people are worried about. But I think the more, in the years that we've been together, the more transparent and the more vulnerable I've been with you, the better understanding that I have of who you are and how you will actually react.
Yeah. And I think that, if you're going into it with an understanding of like, hey, we're we're going to share some hard things with one another. Because I think you should definitely not do it in a space where you're just like dropping a bomb, like, hey, I got something to tell you. And then you just like
Boom.
spew all of these things from your past. You can probably expect not a great reaction from that. But, if you have a conversation about it, like, hey, I have some things that, you don't know about from my past that I want to talk about. And I'd like for you to be able to do the same. And you can come together in a safe space and, maybe have a discussion beforehand of like, my reaction is not going to be anything like, I'm
just going to listen.
I'm just going to listen and say, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
That was one of the things in Re-Engage that we had learned. I don't even remember what lesson it was, but that was like the challenge was like, you're going to allow your spouse to share. And then you're just going to say, thank you for sharing.
Which is really awkward.
Yeah. And it's hard.
Difficult. Yeah. Because
you want to say all the words.
Exactly. Even if it's the good things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's best, like Heather said, to just say, like, I understand that was really hard for you to share that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Like, thank you for being open and sharing that part of you with me.
Yeah. And I think, that can look different if, like, for me and Terry, we've been on this road for a little while of, sharing hard things. And so I think our discussions are going to be a little more open than that. Yeah. And so I think it's harder for us to just say thank you for sharing because I want more from you on that. I want you to, tell me like how, like your opinions on that or your feelings on that. Yeah. But it's because we've worked up to that. But if you're just starting out with, this intimacy and creating that intimacy, you don't have that yet. And so it can be a really, what's the word I'm looking for? Like you got to tread lightly, I guess.
Yeah.
And, you have to have that space where you can just say, thanks for sharing because you haven't worked up to that level of intimacy yet.
Yeah. Cause it takes time and it takes growth. And like you said, we've walked through a lot in the amount of years we've been together. And so, being truly intimate with each other. And even this week, like we just sat in our bedroom and we both shared some of the things that we've been thinking about and carrying this week, not in a negative light, but just some of the struggles that we've had mentally.
Yeah.
And
that's a form of intimacy.
It is. And it did me a lot of good.
You may think like this is just us having a conversation, but those deeper conversations where you're sharing like, this was really hard for me today. I really struggled here.
Yeah.
That is a form of intimacy. Like you're creating a deeper intimacy with your spouse by sharing those things because it's super easy to just not share those things and just internalize that struggle and deal with it yourself. But it makes it so much harder to deal with. And then you just start to feel alone. And I think you can even start to resent your spouse for not being there for you, but they can't be there for you if they don't know they need to be.
And that's something I was just thinking about is that you should always be growing that relationship with your spouse. And if you are, then that's who you should be sharing those things with.
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't be sharing those deep things or those hurtful things or the things that you've walked through in your life with other people instead of your spouse. Yeah. You should be sharing them with your spouse. And that's going to grow that relationship. That's going to grow that intimacy. It's going to grow trust with each other. And that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And I think, you sometimes do have those super close friends in your life that you can share those things with. But I think those should be a secondary person to go to. Your spouse should always be your number one person that you share those things with.
Absolutely.
If you don't share them with anybody else, share them with your spouse. And if you're going to share it, don't share it with somebody else before your spouse.
Yeah. And so like sharing your struggles. So what does that look like? Maybe that's something that you've been hiding, for fear of judgment or rejection. But maybe it's also a physical, mental, or emotional struggle, things that have happened to you in your past.
Yeah. And so, I think at the beginning of a marriage, there's probably going to be a lot more of those things, because you maybe haven't shared everything yet because you're still getting to know each other. But I think even after many years, there can be things. I know when you were going through counseling and hearing or like things were being brought up about your childhood, there were things that you shared with me that, you hadn't shared with me before.
Yeah, and it wasn't out of a place of I was hiding those things or withholding those things. It was, especially when I was going through counseling, it was because those were the things that were being dug up. But also, our brain is a very, very complex thing. I don't even have the slightest clue the complexity of our brains. But one of the things, and I've hit on this before, is one of the things I learned through counseling is our brains will actually suppress memories in a way of protecting us. But through counseling, those memories were brought to a head, and there was things I shared with you that I don't think I ever had.
Yeah. And so, it could look like that stuff from your childhood, but also there may be things that you're currently struggling with. I know something that Terry shared with me very early on in our relationship was his struggle with porn. And, that was not something he had to share with me, but he chose to share that with me, very early on. And so there's all sorts of struggles that we can go through that need to be shared with our spouse. I mean, one, so that they can be there for you,
because
and
that's
help
what we're
you
here
through
for.
it.
New partners.
Yeah, but two, it also fosters that intimacy between you, so that you can, continue to grow in that. And the more you share those kind of things with your spouse, the easier it's going to be down the road to do that.
It builds trust.
Yeah,
because it's me. It's built. I think it builds trust on both sides. It allows Heather to know that I trust her with these parts of my life. But it also allows me, based on Heather's response, to know that I can trust her with those type of things.
Yeah. So something else that we can do to help, create this intimacy is recognizing and admitting where we have blind spots. So a blind spot is something, it's going to be an area of your life where maybe you need improvement, but you maybe can't see that where your spouse can.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to be open to allowing your spouse to point out these blind spots. It's really easy for you to get defensive.
Yeah.
Whenever there's an area of your life that needs improvement, it never feels good to have somebody point out an area in your life where it's like, hey, you're getting it wrong here, or you're not doing great over here. Like, correction never feels good.
No, it doesn't. But if it's done in a place of love and from a place of I care,
right,
then it can be taken in a better light.
Yeah.
And I think it's easier if we already have a lot of trust there, and you tell me, hey, I see these things in you. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy in the moment, because we've had those times. Over this last year, there was a moment where Heather was like, this isn't you, but this is what I see. And it was really hard. And it took lots of hours of conversation for me to be able to get to a point where I was like, okay, I see what you're saying, and know that it was not a place out of like, you suck, you need to quit doing this. Right. You're being a jerk, or whatever the situation is. But it was a place of, that's not who you are. Like, I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And
I think the way you approach things like that too matter, because if you're going to point something out about your spouse, where an area that you see that they're not doing well in, that is going to be a touchy subject no matter what.
Yeah. Especially if they don't see it.
Yeah. And so I think the way you approach it matters. And so taking some time to prayerfully think through that and how you're going to approach that.
Yeah, not just like, hey,
you're sucking in this area.
Right? Yeah,
you need to be better.
Don't come at me defensively or offensively and make me feel like I'm being attacked.
Yeah.
Because then I'm definitely going to get defensive, and I'm going to stand up for myself, even if you think you're in the right by pointing something out. But it's the way that we address the situation.
Yeah. And so, so another way that we can help grow this intimacy is sharing our hopes and our dreams and goals and desires with one another.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to think about just the negative, like if we're sharing with our spouse to grow that intimacy, that, oh, well, we're just sharing our negative stuff, but it's the positive too, you know, sharing, like sitting down and saying, like, where do we want to be in 5 years? Or maybe you have a dream in your head that, like, I want to do this thing one day, and it can feel silly, like it can feel hard to share those things because maybe you think you're not good enough for that, or that would never happen. But sharing those kind of things with your spouse gives them the opportunity to encourage you
and speak life into it.
Yeah.
And when you bring something out, when you say something, that's what you're doing. You're speaking life to it. You're giving it you're giving it to the light. You're speaking life into it. You're not just withholding it for yourselves and just having thoughts of, you know, one day I want to do that. One day I want to write a book. You know, it's looking at what you want and what your desires are, and who better to do that with than the person that you're spending your life with. You know, let your spouse know what your aspirations are in life.
Yeah.
You know, that's building intimacy.
Yeah, and if you have a goal that you want to reach, you know, maybe you are wanting to get healthier or lose weight or eat better, get in the gym more, you know, whatever, or maybe you want to save more money, or you want to start a new business this year. Like these kind of goals that, you know, are attainable goals are much easier to attain if you share them with somebody.
Yeah.
You know, earlier last year, we had started going to the gym together, and it was far easier for me to go to the gym knowing that you were going to be there too, even though we didn't work out together. We went our separate ways, but it was far easier for me to go to the gym because there were days where I was like, I don't want to go to the gym, but I know Terry's going to be there, so I'm going to go. Mm-hmm. And so it gives you kind of that accountability partner. And so when you have somebody that you can share your goals with, that, you know, they're going to share those goals with you because they love you.
Yeah.
And they're going to do what they can to support those goals and help you to reach them.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I feel like you have a greater chance at success in those goals when you share them with your spouse.
Absolutely.
And by sharing them with your spouse, you're creating that intimacy between you, that, you know parts of each other. Maybe it's a goal that's so deep inside of you, or a dream that's so deep inside of you, you would never, dare share it with anyone else. But now your spouse knows about it, and that creates a deeper connection between you two.
So something that we had a note here that I wanted to hit on, and this is kind of a truth, is that you have already been found out by God, and he accepts you. No matter what you've done in your past or what you're doing today, you are accepted by him. Romans 5:8 says, "But God shows you his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." A very tangible expression of God's love in your life will be the love and the acceptance you receive from your spouse, especially when you let them see the not so great parts of you.
Yeah.
So
knowing God's word and how he loves you will help you move towards intimacy with your spouse, because you're loved by God despite your flaws. So don't reject your spouse because of their flaws.
Yeah, because we're both human beings. Mm-hmm. We both have flaws. We both have failures. But God loves us regardless of those things. And that is who we are supposed to be imitating, as Christ.
Yeah.
So, sexual intimacy. So, like we said, intimacy is not just sexual. We just discussed a lot about what it looks like emotionally and on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
And
if you can get all those emotional parts down, the sexual part will be so much better.
Yeah, because we need to feel connected on every level of our lives, not just connected sexually, not just connected emotionally, but on every part.
Well, and maybe this is TMI, but it's our podcast. So, there have been times where, we haven't had that emotional intimacy, and we've always had a great sex life, but our sex life during times of where we weren't connected and we didn't have that emotional intimacy compared to now that we do, like, it's day and night. It's so much better having that connection. And, it's not just a physical thing.
Yeah, it's not just sex.
Yeah.
I think you can have sex and it just be sex, but you can actually, the thing I think about is what is like to make love with you. And that is intimacy.
Yeah.
That's not just the physical, that's the emotional, that's the spiritual, that's us looking into each other's eyes and making that bond with each other.
Okay, don't get too steamy up in here. Our parents listen to this.
They might have to mute this next section.
So sexual intimacy, so this is what most people think of when they think of being intimate. But the truth is sex is so much better once you can be emotionally intimate with your spouse.
So sex is an incredibly powerful part of any marriage. Sex has the ability to pull you closer together, or it can come between you, pushing each other apart. So what does that look like?
So I think I've seen people before use sex as a bargaining chip. I've seen it on social media where it's like, well, my husband isn't doing this, so he's not getting any.
Yeah.
And it's used as a tool to, of manipulation to get what you want. And, I think maybe men can do this too, but I think it's more on the woman's side, because for men, men enjoy sex and, could do it anytime.
I think like we talked about, it's women are more connected emotionally and men are more connected physically. And so I think you're right. I think it's definitely more used as a bargaining chip from women, because as much as a man might say, well, I'm fine without having sex, he probably is on some level, but he is very dependent upon that for that connection.
Yeah. And so I think for a man to be like, well, if you don't do this for me, you're not getting sex, a woman would be like, okay. And
which is weird.
And because for women, that emotional side of it is, much more important than the sexual side of it. And, I think they both go hand in hand and they both work together. And I think they're both very necessary parts. But women do tend to lean more towards that, those emotional needs more so. Yeah. But so you have to understand that sex is not a bargaining chip. It's not something that you use to control or manipulate your spouse.
Absolutely not.
And if you're doing that, you need to stop.
Well, and if you read in God's word, sex is a gift from God. It's to be enjoyed with your spouse and only your spouse. It is something that we should share with one another. Like Heather said, it's not something we should withhold or manipulate each other, because it is a gift. A gift is something that cannot be what's the word I want? There's nothing you can do to earn it, because it is a gift. And if I'm giving my wife a gift, she should not have to do something to earn that gift.
Right. Yeah. Like you don't give that to me because I was good today.
No.
Or because I said the right things today.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you're going to have good days and bad days. And so maybe on the bad days, neither one of you want to have sex.
Yeah.
And that's completely normal.
Absolutely.
But it's not I had a bad day, so I'm not giving you any.
Yeah.
It's just, hey, I've had a bad day. And so I can't go there emotionally right now.
And that's where we have to have that intimacy, so that we can share those things. So you can tell me that. And it not just be a situation where you're not telling me what's going on, and then my thought process is, hey, I'm going to get this gift tonight, and then I don't, and I'm like, what the crap? Why'd you withhold this gift from me, or what's wrong with you? But in turn, if you're sharing with me that you're struggling that day, well then I understand that, and I'm a human just like you are, and sex is a great thing, but that doesn't mean that we're always going to want to do that.
Yeah. So
we talked about sex as being a gift and being able to enjoy it. It was not created for so God's word talks about in Genesis that Adam and Eve should procreate the world.
Yeah, so that he says, be fruitful and multiply.
And multiply the earth.
So he's meaning, go have sex and make babies.
Make kids, because he wanted to populate. But that is not the only reason he created sex.
So if you haven't ever read the book of Song of Songs in the Bible, I would encourage you to just go and read that book. And there's some steamy parts in there. And you'll realize quickly that God didn't intend for sex to be solely for procreation.
No.
That it is truly a gift to be enjoyed between a man and a woman who are husband and wife.
And it's a beautiful thing. And that is something that the world, that Satan has tried to twist and to destroy, and to make it appear that it's gross or that it shouldn't be within marriage. Everything that God has created, that is good. That is what Satan wants to do. Yeah. He wants to destroy, twist, and pervert those things.
Well, and so along with that, so what's okay when it comes to sex? I think that's, especially as Christians, that's a huge question of like, okay, well, what's right and what's wrong when it comes to sex and marriage?
Yeah, because if you think about, okay, I know many, many years ago there was a book, and I think it was a movie eventually, that had come out called 50 Shades of Grey. Mm-hmm. And I never read the book. I never watched the movie, but I'm not like just ignorant. Like, I heard things about the book, and there was lots of things within that book that I would not be okay with.
Yeah.
And that I would look at as wrong, even though, and again, I don't think they were married, but let's just say they were. It doesn't mean that what was happening was okay.
Yeah. Just because you and your spouse are both okay with something, there are some things that still aren't okay.
Aren't biblical.
So if it involves others, if you're bringing someone else into the relationship sexually, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Even if you both agree to it, it's still not okay. That's seen as adultery. It's a sin, and it's just not okay.
It's not good. But it shouldn't be coming from a place that's selfish. It shouldn't be about me. Just give me everything that I want. I don't care about your wants or your needs or your desires. Mm-hmm. We're going to do it the way I want it. We're going to do it when I want it and how we want it. Like, it shouldn't be that.
Yeah.
But also, it shouldn't be hurtful. This is, again, a gift. And never in my life have I ever received a gift that was hurtful.
Yeah.
And so your sexual intimacy with your spouse should not be hurtful. It shouldn't be damaging. It shouldn't be coming from a place of submission. Like, that's not sexual intimacy.
Well, and sadly, when those books came out, the 50 Shades books, that there was a lot of the hurtful type stuff in those books, in which I'm not going to go into details because I don't want this podcast to be vulgar in any way, but there was a lot of the hurtful type stuff in there, but it was being portrayed as something that is just so sensual and erotic and all these things, and
is being twisted.
Exactly. And so I think that having something so widely available out there like that, twisting and turning something that's supposed to be so wonderful into something that becomes pain is like misleading people down this path that they wouldn't have otherwise gone down.
So how do you come to an agreement on that with your spouse? First and foremost, you have to have a conversation.
Yeah.
You have to talk about it.
Yeah. Because ultimately, it's also not okay for there to be something going on that goes against your spouse's conscience.
Yeah.
So there may be something that is technically permissible, that's okay, but maybe your spouse isn't okay with it. And so just because something is okay biblically doesn't mean that it's okay if your spouse isn't okay with it. And so you have to have those conversations.
God doesn't say that it should be this or it should be that. He just says that it should be between us, and that it should be biblical, and there should be standards that we're holding to each other. But it's on we have an agreement on it. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. So you have conversations about it, and that can be awkward and can be
extremely awkward.
Yeah.
Especially the first time hey, let's sit down and talk about talk about sex, baby. Yeah. But
what do you want? What do I want?
What do you enjoy? What do you not enjoy?
Yeah.
Like, are there things that I enjoy that you don't? Mm-hmm. And because if you don't and I do, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. But if you're not okay with that, then I shouldn't be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so having those conversations also, that is a part of creating that emotional intimacy too.
Absolutely.
And creating a place of like a safe place. Like if we have a conversation and I say, I don't like this thing, and you're like, well, I do. Well, now I don't feel safe having sex if you're going to possibly do something that I'm not comfortable with.
Or vice versa.
Yeah. And so, you really have to not only have those conversations, but be willing to say, you know what, even though I want to do that, if you're not comfortable with that, then let's not do it. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about it at a later date. And because the truth of the matter is when you're first starting out and you're first starting to have sex when you're married, like it's a whole lot of learning.
Yeah.
And so maybe something that you're not okay with today, maybe a few years down the road you are okay with because you're more comfortable with one another and you're more comfortable with your own body.
Yeah. I remember Pastor Trustin had shared a story, and I won't go into the details, but there was a couple that had gotten married, and they had not had that conversation, but also he had gotten some things twisted in his mind that he thought was okay, and she was completely not okay with it. Mm-hmm. And so it ruins the opportunity for intimacy.
Yeah.
Like that should be one of the most important times of intimacy between each other. And the last thing I want to do is make you feel uncomfortable or make you feel gross in any way.
Right.
Like
you shouldn't feel dirty after you have sex with your spouse.
Like I want you to feel loved. And if you do, then
something is not right.
Yeah. Like I want you to feel loved and appreciated and sought after.
Yeah.
Not abused or gross or used or neglected, like any of those things.
Yeah.
So.
And I would encourage anybody who maybe has had maybe some sexual abuse in their past or dealt with anything on that level to, seek out counseling. Absolutely. Because that sort of thing it's going to play into your marriage.
Yeah.
If you have any kind of trauma in your past sexually, then it's really going to affect your sexual relationship with your spouse, and that has to be healed.
Yeah.
And that's something, to be open and honest with your spouse about. If you're just getting married and you do have sexual trauma in your past, be open and honest with your spouse about that so that they know from the get-go, like, hey,
this is a sensitive subject, sensitive area in your life.
And how can I help you to heal through this?
And also, I think one of the other things that was talked about when we went through Reengage is it can be painful to certain people because of health reasons. Mm-hmm. And that's something that should be discussed.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially important in situations where if the act of sex is hurtful to one person, having the conversation of saying, okay, what are you okay with so that we can still have the sexual intimacy, not just intercourse, but what are you okay with that is pleasing to you, that would also be pleasing to me, that's not hurting you?
Yeah. And I think, as your life goes on, there's going to be things that happen that are going to affect your sex life.
Yeah.
Babies come, and there's a whole lot of changes that happen with a woman's body during that time. Mm-hmm. And hormones fluctuate. Yep. And there's so many things that can affect your desire and the way that it feels.
On both sides. Like your hormones could be off. My testosterone could be completely gone.
Yeah. And so that's why it's so important to have the emotional intimacy, because if you don't have the emotional, then as soon as the physical maybe starts to wane for a season, everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And you're going to be like, why don't you want me anymore? And you're not going to be able to work through that together because you don't have that emotional side. And so that emotional side has to come first.
Absolutely.
And it has to be the most important so that it can be the foundation that supports the physical side.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, if it's something that's the physical within yourself that needs attention from a doctor.
Yeah.
I hit on testosterone and hormones. Those are both things that can be addressed by a doctor, and do those things together.
Yeah.
Like I went to the doctor, I guess about 8 months ago, and just had a full workup. And not that I was having issues sexually, but Heather was there for those things, and vice versa. You know, I've been there for Heather through her doctor's visits, and so that's a form of emotional intimacy.
Yeah.
And so those are the things you should do together. Discuss those things, talk about those things, and above all, pray about it.
Yeah.
Pray on your own, but also pray with your spouse about those things.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say, if you're having issues sexually, don't go talk to someone else about that instead of your spouse. Like, your spouse should always be the first person that you talk to about that stuff. And I mean, like I said earlier, you can have a friend, a trusted friend that you talk to about some stuff with, but it should not take the place of your spouse.
No, it shouldn't. But all right, y'all.
I think that's probably about it for this episode.
Hanging out.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes, absolutely.
And as always, if you have any questions or if anything that you hear us talk about, sparks a question or comment, like, always feel free to reach out to us for those things.
Sure. All right, y'all.
So we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.